like just the main structure. But like the main, like, so would you like usually like 3 minutes off and 20 minutes questions? So would you like to like just let's have questions? You'll just let me know. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this talk. I'm Melissa, I'll just be moderating, so I'm taking up questions afterwards as well. We have Joy Bittner here today with us, who will be talking to us about, so the session is called Flourishing Life, Scaling Evidence-Based Treatment for the Vulnerable in the case of depression. So Joy is originally from the US. She's been living and working in South America and Latin America for 15 years. Where she founded Vida Plena. Vida Plena is a mental health organization that provides treatment for local community leaders so that they can, with evidence-based strategies for people with depression. This method has been endorsed by the World Health Organization as being one of the top recommended strategies for mental health care in low-income areas. So, yeah, just reminding you that afterwards we have some time for questions as well, so feel free to use Slide, which you can access the swap card. Yeah, the floor is yours.
So good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I just want to say first off, how really wonderful it is to be part of this whole community. The fact that there's this place where there's people that are the intersection between like being very thoughtful about how do we do good in the world and then how do we apply that to our faith. And it feels really special to be here. So just thank you to each one of you who's just by your mere presence is saying like, this is something we're thinking about and we're caring about. So in any case, my name is Joy and I am here to talk to you about depression, which obviously kind of semi-ironic, but that's actually not quite correct because Vida Plena translates into Spanish to an abundant life. And that's taken directly from the verse from John 10:10 when Jesus says, I have come to give you life and life abundantly. And because that's actually what we're really trying to do with Vida Plena, is we're helping people to come through depression to a life that is full of abundance. This is because sometimes we use these terms like mental health and depression, and they can kind of come off as cold and clinical, but really that's what we're actually doing here. It's not just about helping people go from being depressed to some sort of like, if it's even possible, some sort of like neutral baseline. God has called us, Christ has called us to live a life that is full, that is flourishing. And so that is what we're actually seeking here. But this is going to be a little bit different than a typical talk. So actually I want to stop and take a moment and have you find somebody next to you. And if you haven't met, and briefly introduce yourself to that person. And then we're going to take 5 minutes. And I would like for you to each take a turn answering this question. When was there somebody in your life, outside of your immediate family who's obligated to, who has supported you, who is there for you? So we're actually going to just take 5 minutes to do that right now. Okay, so we can kind of start to bring it back in. Finish your thoughts. So you're probably like, okay, that's a little bit of an odd start to a talk, so why did I have you do that? The reason I had you do that is because Vida Plena is based off of the power, it's a group therapy, it's not an individual therapy, so really what that means is that we are based off of the power of people coming together. People forming relationships, people forming communities. And so I just want to think about that little experience you had. You just had like 5 minutes right now, and you undoubtedly learned something significant about that person next to you, and you probably shared something significant about yourself. And so if you take that and you times those 5 minutes to an hour and a half across 2 months, that is like the power of being part of one of our groups. And so that is what we're doing. We are forming communities for people to come together, to learn from one another, and to support each other. And so it's a kind of, this is the reason it's a little bit different than the average EA talk, because I have a very deep conviction that what we're called to do is to form communities. And specifically as Christians, this is the model that has been set for us. God himself lives as the Trinity in community, and then the whole gospel story is that of him saving us from coming in relationship, Christ coming to save us as a desire to build relationship. And then for us to coming together as the church to form relationships and community. And so that's kind of what we're trying to replicate with Vida Plena, is kind of forming these small mini communities where people are able to come together again. So how does this tie to depression and kind of the work we're doing? It is that. Exactly that. Depression often causes people to withdraw, from their relationships, from their family. And so by forming communities, these groups of support, it gives people an opportunity to start to rebuild that. So let's take a step back for a second. So why should we care about depression? And specifically, why as Christians who are EAs, we're looking to use the best of our resources to focus on the areas that have the most need, why should we care about mental health and depression? So I'm going to make a kind of a case for you. First, I'm going to focus on what is the EA case for prioritization. And then I'm going to talk to you about a model that we are using with Vida Plena, how the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of that. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what it is that you can do, how you can apply this, kind of what could the future look like. So we're going to take a step back, and I'll throw some numbers at you, because when I first learned them, they were somewhat shocking. According to the WHO, about 5, and I'll focus on Latin America because that's where we're operating. I live and I'm based in Quito, Ecuador. And so there's about 5% of people who are living with depression in this moment. And that translates to about 33 million people. But that's not exactly quite right, because that was before the pandemic, and a number of estimates say that went up about at least 25% in Latin America. So if you take that 33 million people, but if you've ever had a family member who's gone through a mental health crisis, you know that it doesn't just affect that individual. It affects their family, it affects their coworkers, it affects their children. And so the rippling effects of depression is much, much greater than just this initial number. I also wanted to dispel a quick myth, just take a brief second aside. Often I get a lot of questions of maybe depression, this is actually just a modern problem. This is a result of our everyday life, the pressures we feel, the pace. But that 5% is just about on par with what it is in the US. So that dispels that myth. If depression is about the same in the US as it is in the developing world, that means it's not a result of our modern life. On the other hand, it means that if we solve poverty, we're not just going to solve mental illness either. Sometimes that's another thing that people often talk about. But if that was true, we wouldn't have mental illness in the US, in the UK, and we all know that's also not the case. So I just wanted to dispel both of these myths pretty quickly. What, however, is different than for people living with mental illness and depression in Latin America is that 3 out of 4 people don't receive any care. And that's largely due to 2 facts. First is private care is unaffordable. And then secondly, there's almost very little, almost no public investment into mental health. Less than 1% of national public health budgets are put towards mental health, which is 6 times less than in high-income countries. But so why do we really care about this? So we have these numbers and figures, and they're a helpful shorthand, but they don't really capture the actual experience. Because what we're talking about here is being more than just sad. Having poor mental health means that the definition of depression is that there's a loss of sense of pleasure and enjoyment in daily activities and an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. And that is actually what it means to be living with depression. It means that you are not able to find enjoyment in day-to-day things. It means that average, normal activities start to feel overwhelming, if not impossible. You don't have energy to do things you want to do. Often you can't even get out of bed. Life often starts to feel like it's not worth living. And even worse is that fear that it might not get better. So we use this box to kind of call something mental health, but really mental health affects every single aspect of our lives. It affects our physical health, it affects our work, it affects our relationships. And so people who are living with mental illness, specifically with depression, really what it comes down to as EAs and as Christians, we are called to end suffering. And the suffering that people who are living with mental illness face is so much worse that they are 20 times more likely to die from suicide. However, there is good news. We do have methods of interventions that have been proven and are effective. And that have been shown to help people come out of depression. So specifically, I'm going to talk to you about interpersonal therapy, which is a model of therapy that has been adapted by Columbia University, the Global Mental Health Lab, and it has been adapted to be used in low-income countries in group settings. And this has been proven to be so effective that it is endorsed by the World Health Organization as one of their top-line treatments in low-income settings. So interpersonal therapy is considered to be highly effective. There's been a number of different studies that demonstrate that, and this goes back all the way to 2005. There was a team that studied this did an RCT in Uganda, and what they found was that compared to the control group, 75% of people had a significant reduction in their depression symptoms 6 months following the end of treatment. So what that says is that we not only have treatments that are effective, they are treatments that are durable and they continue to last. Because that is a problem often with depression. It is something that can become very cyclical, and there's often people are prone to relapses. So working with treatments that help people to not just feel better in the moment, because we don't want to just be putting that Band-Aid on it. What we're looking to do is help people to develop new skills and techniques that they can then apply in other moments in their future. So I just want to highlight these. So there's a number of different studies. These are not just like one-off studies, these are RCTs. And then this is the manual that was then developed by the World Health Organization. And so now that we have 15 years of evidence, and Columbia University has been training international organizations such as UN Refugees, such as CARE, and the entire Ministry of Health of Lebanon has implemented interpersonal therapy as their treatment method. So really what we're doing, there is this exceptional body of evidence demonstrating the effectiveness of this. People across Africa and the Middle East are benefiting from this program. So just going to want to talk through basically what it looks like. Basically what there are, these are groups. They are about on average 8 people, and they meet in their local community, in their local school, a church, community center, basically the places and spaces where people already are. People come together for about an hour and a half, and what they do during that time is they are discussing kind of their day-to-day problems. The point of interpersonal therapy is to help people understand how their day-to-day life affects their depression and how their depression affects their day-to-day life. And so really what that is people learning the skills to be able to better manage their depression in the moment. There are some therapies which are really important that'll go back in history and look at past traumas. Interpersonal therapy is very much focused on what's happening here and now. And then specifically is that community support aspect, helping people to build up those relationships and have a place to be able to practice those new skills. So you might be thinking, to get these kind of results, you probably have to have a really expensive team of psychiatrists and psychologists. And then that brings me to the second critical aspect of this program model, is that it is based off of community members who live and work in their own communities, and then they become certified and trained in this particular type of therapy. And so that is what is actually exciting about this. And so this is basically everyday people who already live there and they already understand the problems that are being faced. And then they are given the tools to be able to facilitate a group. And so what does that actually look like? I often like to think about it as you come together in a group, and then it's not unlike you had that friend who's exceptionally emotionally intelligent, a really good listener, and you come in and you start to talk through, this is what happened the past week, and then you start to break that down into great detail. You start to learn about how can you do things differently, how can you apply that differently, and then there's a huge aspect of group sharing and group learning from one another. And I think that is what's a significant part of the power of this, because it takes the pressure off of the group leader, the group facilitator, to have all of the answers as the expert, but it really is kind of drawing upon the collective wisdom. And so then what we see is that people start to come together outside of their groups. They start to have other connections. Just a small anecdotal story about that is there was a group that decided together that one of the things they needed to do was start to exercise more. And so they started doing exercise classes outside of their regular group meetings. And they started through the group facilitator, they invited other group members to come from other groups to come join them. And this is just as like a small example of how like this kind of happens. People come together. And just as a side note, there's been a number of studies that have looked at the effectiveness of these community members leading groups and how does that work. And so specifically looking at community health worker models, which is what these are called, the annual review of clinical psychology did a study in 2017 in which they looked at 27 clinical trials, and they concluded that community health workers were able to significantly improve the mental health outcomes in low-income settings. So this method has been tested and proved. So just going to one more step, kind of thinking about this. So like, why should EAs care about this? Another thing we always care about is cost effectiveness. And so with Sam, actually, we put together a predictive cost effective analysis in which we estimate that, talking about well-being, subjective well-being, we estimate that at scale, this will be about $77 per person, $70 per person treated, and then $17 per well-being. But for that to have a little bit of context, we can compare it then to Give Directly. And so we expect it to be about 8 times more cost effective than Give Directly. However, then the next piece that EAs often look at is scalability. So despite the fact that there has been this extensive body of evidence demonstrating that interpersonal therapy is an effective therapy, that it's cost effective, there was nobody doing this in Latin America. And so that is why Vida Plena was formed, to be able to bring this and replicate those results that we've seen in other places in Latin America. And so I just want to tell a little bit more of like the backstory. So as you could note from my accent, I'm from the US, I'm not from Ecuador. I've been living there for 15 years in Latin America now. And so kind of where I started out, my backstory is I moved to Ecuador to work for a fair trade company. Specifically, we worked with indigenous women who were artisans and they were making handmade jewelry. So that meant I spent numbers of hours sitting around kitchen tables, streaming beads and hearing about people's stories. And there was one particular woman that I worked with, and tragically, her husband had died from suicide, and that left her alone with 4 young children. And even though we had given her a job, we thought that would solve all the problems. As you might expect, that does not solve all the problems. And so I was trying to help her connect with a psychologist, for her and her kids to be able to connect with a psychologist. But because of the difficulties of distance, of cost, of all the logistics, it wasn't possible. I wasn't able to help her get that. And so kind of part of that is from where Vida Plena was born. And so kind of like, and then really what it was that was kind of like the first piece. And then the next piece was seeing these examples of other organizations. Some of you might be familiar with Strong Minds and Friendship Bench that came out of Sub-Saharan Africa, and seeing the success that they had and wanting to replicate that. And so that's kind of really where the backstory is for Vida Plena. So what's our kind of like our pathway? So we launched last year, myself and my co-founder, Anita Caslin, who is an Ecuadorian psychologist. And we went through the Charity Entrepreneurship Program last summer. Proud to say we are the first organization in Latin America to go through the Charity Entrepreneurship Program. And we are also one of the very first EA organizations to be operating on the ground in Latin America at all. So we launched with our pilot in the fall, and what we did with that is we worked with Columbia University, the same university team who's done all of the training for these institutions around the world, and they trained 16 people in Ecuador, and then we ran 10 groups. And then with that we did, this is just preliminary evidence from our baseline and end line, but what we did see was there was a significant reduction in depression. And so working with the Columbia University team, we are able to find that like our results are on track with everything that they've seen everywhere else. Specifically, we are looking at depression scores using the PHQ-9. We also look at anxiety with the GAD. We look at post-traumatic stress with the PCL. These are all kind of standardized psychological measurements. And we were able to see reductions in every piece. And of course, we did look at subjective well-being as well. But just kind of like a small anecdotal sort of side success, Columbia mentioned to us that in all of their 15 years of doing these types of training and training the group facilitators, we're the first organization that didn't have any of the facilitators drop off. They said normally there's about a reduction of about, it could be 25 to 30, sometimes even 50% of the people they initially train drop out of the program because they realize it's not for them, it's not a good fit. And I'm exceptionally proud to say that all of our facilitators have continued on. And so where we are now, we are continuing to run groups. At the moment, we're running 15 new groups, and the goal is for this year to continue going forward. Specifically, this is some updated numbers that we've seen before, but our aim is to be able to treat about at least 1,500 people this year and about 3,000 people next year. So really what we're doing this year and next year, we're setting up the structures to be able to have the ability to operate at scale. What that means is the ability to recruit people, the ability to track data properly, to be able to become a learning institution. But really our vision is for that. We want to be the leaders in Latin America in being able to provide quality and quantity of service. And specifically though, that is like being able to reach people in the places where they might not otherwise be able to get any type of care. And so to be able to do that, I want to talk a little bit about the math behind that. So our facilitators are paid an annual salary, about $9,000 a year, which in local terms is a reasonable salary. And we can train one person for $200. And that person, over the course of a year, they can run about 60 groups. And then if we put a slightly more conservative estimate of 7 people per group, that means one facilitator can treat 400 people annually. By the end of next year, we hope to have at least 50 facilitators. So that's kind of how we're able, kind of like our pathway to scale. But kind of, I want to zoom back even further. So if we go back and remember there was like that 33 million people that conservative estimate who are currently living with depression. If we take that cost per person of $77, that means over the course of 10 years for an annual budget of $250 million, we could reach every single person in Latin America. Okay, that's like obviously quite a high number. 250 million is a very high number. And so I'm not saying that we are the ones who have to do all of that, but what I is saying is our pathway to scale is to be able to work with national governments, because UNICEF recently released a report in which they said that counterfactually, $30 billion is lost a year to untreated mental health illness in Latin America alone. So all of a sudden, being able to work with national governments means that is our pathway to be able to actually reach within 10 years every single person. So I kind of want to loop back around to where we started. So this is the mission of Vida Plena, to help people come through their depression to be able to live lives that are flourishing and abundant. And so kind of, there's a lot of different takeaways for you. Obviously, if you're a student and you're interested, there's a lot of different pathways that I'm happy to talk to you about how to get involved in mental health care, supported financially a number of different institutions. In addition to Vida Plena, there is an EA mental health funding circle. And then just generally though, but what I really want to call you to is to think about your own community, and specifically your Christian community. How does your Christian community, how does your church support people living with mental illness and support people with depression? And what can you be doing more to be building that community out around them? It's not easy. I'm not going to pretend that it is an easy path, and our work with Vida Plena hasn't been easy also, but it is doable. And so just to kind of close, I'm going to show you a video, which is one of our facilitators talking directly about her experience. And then I want to take a few minutes to actually have some discussion questions, because I think while I'm bringing to you some of like what we're doing, I really want to challenge you as more of like, how can you be thinking about this yourself? So we're gonna have to take a few minutes at the end then to take some time to actually share some thoughts. And then if there's any kind of longer question and answers, we can answer those at the end as well. So I will just show you this part first.
Con Vida Plena entendí que era parte de una sintomatología de la depresión, algo que me gustó muchísimo porque siento que mi divinidad me trató de la manera como me gusta, con conocimiento, porque el desconocimiento te hace un esclavo. Y cuando llegué a Vida Plena, pues mi querida yo y mi querida Anita me recibieron con una gran sonrisota y yo dije, bueno, creo que tengo un lugar agradable.
Todos nos apuramos en nuestro querido Chigarín y damos un gran abrazo.
Llegan las personas como con expectativas. A algunos les cuesta abrirse, a otras les gusta solamente hacerlo bien. Pero en el camino de los grupos van desarrollando estas habilidades de comunicación por la observación. Las personas que no querían participar se sienten motivadas por otras. Y se va creando como esta empatía de escuchar e intervenir prudentemente ante una situación de una persona que está exponiendo. Soy una persona amable, curiosa, que tiene muchas bendiciones. Y si el día de hoy no va bien, yo me voy a encargar de hacerlo mejor. Traspasa el momento del grupo y empiezan a apoyarse fuera de este momento. Entonces, hola, ¿cómo estás? Se llaman, se escriben, se invitan a tomar un café, a escucharse en otro momento, y creo que esa es una de las proyecciones, ¿no?, del programa, de que los lazos y los vínculos sean primero de reconocerte delante de una persona que también vive lo que tú estás viviendo, pero también que pueda significar el apoyo de esta persona, que no es una obligación, pero nace de cada una de las personas. Es bonito ese vínculo que se crea. No sabes cuánto era mi anhelo de poder tratar mi depresión, y es algo tan costoso, es algo inaccesible en mi vida. Y yo creo que no solamente en Latinoamérica tiene que darse, yo creo que hay muchas personas que necesitan en el mundo entero tener un programa que les acobije y que les apoye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. ¡Listo! ¡Para adentro! ¡Vamos!
Vida Plena para mí es un proyecto que debería estar en todas las comunidades, así de sencillo. Quisiera decirle a Vida Plena y a todos los que somos parte de este proyecto que sigamos creyendo, que me siento en un lugar donde finalmente conseguí un propósito que es posible llevarse a cabo.
Buenas. Hola, Simita. ¿Cómo estás?
Me llevo un montón de esfuerzos, me llevo un montón de estrategias creadas para poder seguir adelante. Me llevo una enorme tarea de seguir conectada a la vida, porque eso fue lo que me enseñaron. De ambos, pues súper agradecida, porque como dices, aprendí a que soy digna para recibir y que tengo la capacidad para dar. Eso fue mi vida plena.
Hola, ¿cómo estás, profe? Chao, mamá, te amo.
Sí, estoy muy orgullosa de ser de acá. A veces uno ve la parte económica. No, ay, no, esto es la migración, no lo que te motiva. No, tengo que salir. Hay otra oportunidad económica. Pero sí, claro que sí. Y desde afuera te dicen, no, tienes que salir porque ya no hay futuro, total. Y uno dice, el futuro soy yo. Latinoamérica soy yo.
So yeah, that is Dima, who came from Venezuela and just really one of the incredible people who are making this possible. And so I get the privilege of standing up here in front and telling you a little bit about what we're doing, but it really is Dima and the rest of the facilitators who are actually making this transformation happen and who are touching the lives of the people that we're working with. So just what I want to do is just kind of circle back around. And so go ahead and we're going to take now just like about 10 more minutes. And I want to kind of just think through these questions here. We'll maybe in a few minutes less, but just kind of take a moment. And I really want this to be our takeaway. Thinking about like, is this something that you talk about in your communities? If so, how or not? How should we as Christians be thinking about this and kind of pulling back to what is guiding us? What did the scripture say? What kind of passages and stories come to mind to think about this? And then in what ways have you witnessed the church be a supportive community for people who are suffering? And then what ways can we do better? So we'll just take a few minutes again, kind of back into your pairs, and then we'll come back as a group to kind of share, because really what I want to hear is I want to learn from you guys. You guys are the ones who are actually living this out in the day-to-day. And I'd love to hear your ideas. So we'll just take 5 minutes to do this as well.
How long would you like to discuss that in the plenary?
Okay, I'm gonna just kind of pull us back around and to kind of like close out our time a little bit. Just wondering if anybody had like one or two thoughts that they wanted to share, something that really came out during your discussions that you'd love to share with like the wider group. Yeah.
I'm from Uruguay, so I'm South American, and it's really important to have charities working in your own region when you're trying to have conversations around this type of thing. I'm not religious, but about my community, I can say that Uruguay has a very high suicide rate, one of the highest in America, apart from Guyana and Suriname. And it's not something that is talked about much at all. And how to reach these conversations in your community is like very, very difficult when it's something that affects almost everyone in your community, but nobody wants to talk about it. So yeah, that was my reflection about this.
Anybody else kind of interesting kind of thoughts come out during your conversations?
Well, I have thought about the question of how the church responds to people suffering from depression. And my focus, well, let's look at it as broadly as possible and its complexity. What I mean by that is, for example, because the first thing that came to my mind in relation to, for example, the work of Vida Plena, right, is whether our churches provide a community-based group therapy, something like what Vida Plena is doing, right? And so I was thinking, well, some do, some don't, right? But I thought, well, but that's not the only thing, the only way that you can respond, right, to the problem of depression. And I tried to take a step back and see that actually there are things that maybe are more fundamental to what the church is, that can be a response to depression. So, for example, the church that is, that we give you like simple, very simple example. The church that is open throughout the day for prayer, right? So that might be a huge, make a huge difference for people in the neighborhood, right? Who do not have a safe space to come and reflect and pray, right? And just this isolated thing of just having an open church that is safe to pray and be at, right? Can will be a factor in someone actually improving in their mental health. Same goes for worship and liturgy, right? That is present in the church. So things that are maybe, well, don't necessarily have to be, well organized in the sense of group therapy. So can also have an impact and be a response.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful kind of example. I think there was one more last thought in the back.
Yeah. Just that because in different communities, people might tend to move around a lot, whether it's lower income people for migration reasons or higher income people for work and education. Either way, you have issues of isolation and loneliness. So people tend to, when they join a church, it's somewhere that's really accessible to where they live. So churches tend to pull people that are able to be physically there for each other with lower effort, mental effort and physical effort. So people can provide, if you build relationships among parishioners of churches more intentionally, then organically there will be childcare, elder care visits. I've noticed that is something in my parish where there was an elderly woman who lives alone, who a different parishioner noticed she wasn't there, reached out to her, was like, helped her when she was homebound for a time due to an injury. And so those kinds of connections we need to build more.
I think that is like a really beautiful illustration. Just kind of the question I want to leave you then with is, we talk about being the church and the church should do this, but I want to kind of challenge each of us individually to think about what are the concrete steps that you could take. And so there's kind of, sometimes it's easy to be global and just be like, okay, and of course it's the most cost effective thing we want to think about, like where we're going to donate, and that could be far away. But as Christians, I think we are called to set a different example, and even within the EA community. Like how are we going to take concrete steps in our own lives? Because sometimes it's easy just to donate and send money away and feel like you've checked your box and you're done. But I think Christ has called us to take a much harder step, to put ourselves uncomfortable at times, and to actually live in our own lives in a different way, and actually reach out to the people around us. So love to leave you with this question, and not just like think about it, but actually like commit to something right now to yourself. What will that be? Who will that person be that you will reach out to? So with that, I think we're about at time. And so I think there was a few questions, so I think we'll cut it off, but I'll be around to kind of answer any questions that might come up or things you might want to discuss further. But just really thank you so much for being interested in this topic. There's a lot more conversation that's continually happening, but there's still just sort of, we use the word stigma, but really what it is, it's kind of this sense of like ickiness of like somehow we might catch. And the fact that you're willing to be here and have these conversations and be open to it says an incredible lot. And my vision is that as Christian EAs, we can be leading kind of the discussion and the conversation within the wider community. So thank you so much.